Hello and welcome to this video on Philosophy for All. I am your host, Joshua Yen, and today we're joined by a very special guest, a fellow colleague of mine at the University of Oxford, doing a DPhil in philosophy and a fellow YouTuber as well, Miles K. Donahue. He's coming onto the channel to talk about YouTube, philosophy of religion, and academia in general. Miles, how are you?
I'm doing well, Joshua. Thank you for having me.
Well, so to get started off, can you tell us a bit about, what got you into philosophy in general? What's the backstory?
Yeah. So the lore on me is I came to philosophy through the back door. I grew up quite religious, but also just naturally very curious, always asking questions about stuff. And so eventually I applied that curiosity to religion. And I remember pestering my mother all sorts of nuanced questions about biblical interpretation. I remember being like, okay, the Garden of Eden, where is it today? What happened to it? And so then off I went on tangents about that. And I just kind of kept asking those deep questions about God's existence and faith and the relationship between science and religion. And as I got older, I got more intentional and sophisticated with it, read articles online, found books in Christian apologetics, and so then became quite acquainted with that material. And then through Christian apologetics, I found the philosophy of religion more broadly, the analytical, philosophical investigation into religious claims that ostensibly isn't just an apologetics project. It's meant to be objective. It's meant to be open to the possibility that these beliefs are false. And then from philosophy of religion, I found philosophy as a whole. This intellectual enterprise looking at life's deepest questions, whether they relate to religion or not. I found the whole of philosophy just utterly fascinating. I mean, I remember when I read my first proper intro to philosophy book, and I thought, this is fascinating that there is a discipline devoted to this kind of stuff. I thought this is the stuff you just kind of sat up at night thinking about and that kept you from sleep. But there was a pathway where you could spend your life rigorously thinking about just these questions, this main thing I'm passionate about. And I thought that was so cool. And so from there, that was when I was 14, 15, 16. And so I always knew philosophy was the passion from that point onward. But then up until now, it's been just this question of, do I want to pursue this as my main thing or not? Do I want it to be a hobby? And obviously, I have clearly settled on I want this to be my main thing. And so I'm here getting my PhD. Prior to that, I did my MPhil in philosophical theology at Oxford. Loved it. It was one of those rare times in life where you look at the description of a program or a thing you're about to do, and you have this concept of what it's going to be like. Rarely do things in reality live up to expectations, but that program did completely. And so I thought, okay, this is what I want to do. And so then after that, I came back to Oxford for the DPhil in philosophy proper. So that's what brought me to now.
So you talked about getting into philosophy of religion from the perspective of, I guess, biblical interpretation, questions of the existence of God. Why do you think of course you do most of your work on the fine tuning. What made you come towards more of the philosophy of religion side instead of, let's say, maybe biblical scholarship, which of course Oxford's very well known for?
Right. So the degree in philosophical theology represents that struggle, right? Do I want to do philosophy? Do I want to do theology? I think for me, while I have an interest in theology or biblical exegesis, interpretation, I guess there's two reasons. The first is that philosophy of religion is broader in scope than theology. So you consider a wider array of questions. There is a discipline called natural theology, which looks at arguments for God's existence. But really, that's a subdiscipline of philosophy of religion. Typically in systematic theology, for example, you kind of just take as a premise or an axiom that the biblical material is correct, right? That the Bible is God's revelation to humanity. And then you seek to integrate it with other disciplines like philosophy or science and try to show its coherence and reasonableness and how it all fits together into one systematic whole. Well, that was too limited a scope for me because I wanted to know, should we believe that starting point? I didn't want to box myself in to a broadly Christian worldview. I wanted the room to think through these questions and to potentially land on a position that lied well outside the scope of Christian orthodoxy. So, that might sound self-serving, and I don't mean it to sound that way, but it's just that I wanted to approach these questions as like the idealistic philosopher with a genuinely open mind to whether or not God exists, to whether or not he has revealed himself specifically in the Christian religion, and to positions even that might be qualified as Christian, but outside orthodoxy. And so for that reason, I declined to go into theology proper. And the other reason is just that while my interests are in philosophy of religion, I really do have an interest in philosophy as a whole. So questions about moral realism, whether or not moral principles are subjective or objective, and if so, how they are and how we can know that. Questions of applied ethics are fascinating to me. Issues in metaphysics and epistemology, all of those questions are intensely fascinating for me, and I wanted to have the room to pursue those as well. But that kind of stuff is outside the scope of theology, and so for those reasons and others, it was philosophy that was the path for me.
And how do you think your journey in the philosophy of religion has impacted, or maybe has not impacted, your religious development? So you talked about growing up in quite a religious environment. Would you say you allowed what you've learned through your master's or now with your DPhil kind of impacting that religious faith, or perhaps it has just been completely separated or compartmentalized?
No, not compartmentalized at all. I think that the only honest way to do something like this is to do it as an integrated whole. And I think that the main impact of my study of philosophy and philosophy of religion has been a move towards the middle, a move towards less certainty, more agnosticism, more tentativeness in my affirmations, and a greater and greater open-mindedness to the various possible answers to these fundamental questions. So I've come from a place, say, starting with a commitment to young earth creationism, so a 6-day literal interpretation of Genesis where God created the world in 6 literal days and did so about 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. And there was no evolution. From that, and the idea that the rapture was going to happen next week, or at least shortly around then. And from that position of like looking for signs of the end times, I've come from that place, a very specific kind of religious, to here where I'm largely agnostic about philosophy of religion and philosophy as a whole. I have certain commitments. I do believe in God. I am a moral realist. I think there are objective moral principles. I incline towards an A theory of time, for example, presentism. Whether you know what that is or not, the point is I have some philosophical commitments where I feel strongly enough to say that I believe X. But outside that, I don't know. And I'm comfortable saying that. And so if you say, well, what are your specific religious beliefs? Give me more. I can't because I don't know. And it's not like I'm not a pure intellectual. There have been non-intellectual reasons as well that or rational factors, I suppose, that have pushed me in that direction. But one of them has been my growing acquaintance with sophisticated arguments on both sides of all of these issues. I mean, at some point you got to go, okay, I've investigated, say, this very narrow subset of questions, and I found that the arguments on both sides are incredibly nuanced and complex, and evaluating these things takes so much time. I think from that you can infer inductively, it probably applies to all of them, all of the things in philosophy. And so for that reason, I have to go, this is just too much for any one person to honestly say, I know the truth. And so for most of this, I have to say, I don't know the truth. So that's been my intellectual development.
And I think that's something I share with you, and very much in sentiment, I suppose. As you go through this, you often come from it. I'm not sure that you came from a kind of an American evangelical background, because I grew up in an evangelical church back home in Hong Kong as well. Yeah. And it was very much, everything's very certain, everything's clearly revealed oftentimes, even within the realm of biblical inerrancy and whatnot. It has to be my interpretation, or perhaps it's not the correct interpretation. Oh, that's kind of true, but it's a very clear and clear-cut vision of things. And as time goes on, even with questions of the existence of God, morality, and lots of things, I do get towards this more of an agnostic position. However, I've tried in some sense to prevent that almost temptation towards a form of intellectual paralysis to lead into a paralysis with my religious practice as well. And I guess even though, like, if someone came to me and talked to the 14-year-old now, my 14-year-old self, and said, well, Josh, do you like the fact that, in in 7 or 8 years' time, you're going to be less certain about the existence of God, truth, inerrancy of scripture, and these things. Would you be happy about that? I might say, maybe not, but the guy who's telling that my younger self about myself now, we say, well, you're kind of doing all the same things. In fact, maybe your practice is or has been developed even further as a Christian in many senses. So I was wondering, where do you think one should, or where one could potentially draw the line between one's growing agnosticism on the intellectual sides, but also their religious practice? Because I suppose someone could, in theory, realize that the reasons they have for their belief in their practice may not be as strong as they used to have them, but it still does not at least change the need or the motive for them to carry out those religious practices in their life. Where would you draw the line between that?
Well, I think that's a good question. And I don't know where the line is because I think it's vague. But for one thing, I think that if you became certain that God did not exist and that the Bible was just a human book, perhaps with some good wisdom from human reflection upon ethics and how to conduct one's life, but otherwise just a human book, you should not be an evangelical Christian. So that should impact your religious practice. I mean, you could opt for something like religious fictionalism, which is this kind of meta-religious view that says that religious claims can be or ought to be understood as fiction, and you're kind of just participating in religious life with the pretense as a pretense. You know it's false, but you want to partake in it, so you operate within that world, knowing it's a fiction. You could go that route, but I think the simplest thing is just to say that I am not a Christian in this case, and I can't practice as such. But there are lots of shades of views in between certainty that something is false and certainty that it's true. And the really interesting questions happen for those who are near the middle, who are pretty agnostic. I think that it's perfectly fine to participate in religious life with enthusiasm, even if you're not sure that the things being claimed and spoken of are true. It's just that for someone like myself, I really only have the conviction that God exists. And outside of that, for anything more specific or additional to that, I really am just 50-50 agnostic, or however you want to analyze agnosticism. And for that reason, it's very hard for me to enter, say, a Christian church and participate on a regular basis, to engage in the practices that we commonly associate with being a Christian, reading the Bible, praying consistently, going to church, and so on. And it's just because I'm just not sure that these things are true. So I guess that's the answer to your question, is that I don't know where the line is, but for me, that seems to be the implication of my intellectual stance. It's not just weakened reasons, I suppose. It's really not knowing if these things are true in the first place. And for that reason, I don't find the drive to participate in the religious life, because there are other religious practices I could engage in which might be equally justified. So it's a period of searching and uncertainty for me right now, and I don't have any hard and fast answers for it, I guess.
And I suppose you described it as a period of searching, and in many senses, I suppose that's what philosophers are, kind of as description, the lovers of wisdom, and we kind of try to look for the truth and pursue what at least we believe to be the most representative of reality, if that's how someone might want to put it. And I was wondering, you've looked at the fine-tuning arguments a lot. Have you felt that you've been going towards a certain direction through your research, or has it kind of just led to even more uncertainty than when you've begun?
That's a good question. So with respect to the fine-tuning argument itself, I think I've slowly moved in the direction of thinking it's a good argument. And I suppose then you ask, well, where did I begin my views on the fine-tuning argument? And I think, I was first acquainted with it through the work of like William Lane Craig in his public lectures and debates, that, we have these facts arising from contemporary physics and cosmology where it looks like various features of the laws of physics are very, very delicately placed or balanced, such that if you altered the magnitudes or values of these features, of these parameters, even slightly, even a teeny tiny bit in one direction or the other, the physics that would result, the kind of universe that would result from these new parameter values, would be completely inhospitable to life. It would destroy the life-permitting conditions throughout the entire universe. So to give one very clear example, If you altered the strength of the cosmological constant, either up or down, then either the universe would recollapse in on itself shortly after the Big Bang, or it would fly apart so fast that gravity wouldn't have a chance to gain a foothold to form galaxies and therefore to allow for the evolution of life. So you can see very clearly the kind of thing that people mean by fine-tuning. There's this incredibly narrow, life-permitting range of values for the constants and the quantities and the parameters. And the question becomes, why do these parameters possess life-permitting values? When it would look like, if they were just to assume them randomly, it looks like overwhelmingly probable that they should be life-prohibiting rather than life-permitting. And so why do they allow for life? And then one natural explanation is, well, there's a cosmic designer that set these parameters in place intentionally. You can think of these cosmic dials affixed outside the universe, and this would be the idea that there is a cosmic mind that just tuned them precisely. Okay, and then of course there are other explanations, and on the argument goes. And I found that very intriguing, and on its face, I went, yeah, this is right. But of course, then I quickly realized the conversation was far more complicated, and so then I took an agnostic stance. And then from there, through the serious engagement with it, I incline to think that it succeeds, but I'm still not sure. And I know that's got to look so lame that, like, take a stance, Miles, like, say something. But I just can't. I just can't with intellectual honesty. It seems to me that if I did that, I would be going past what the evidence warrants. And maybe I've got an incorrect view about the relationship between making a claim and the evidence required to do so. But, maybe. But from where I stand now, my bar for most things in philosophy or just life as a whole is really high. I am naturally a very skeptical person. And so I think that kind of explains why it's so hard for me to make to have definitive stances on these issues. Is my bar's high. My bar's high. Maybe I should lower it, but I don't know how to do that. And so for the time being, I just have to admit that for me, for whatever my standard is, nothing has yet crossed that threshold for, okay, I can see it's clear enough. I can make this claim. I can take this stance. So I give the very milquetoast lukewarm answer that I incline to think this is a good argument for a designer, but not enough to say that I think it is.
And what draws you particularly to the fine-tuning argument? I suppose you've introduced it slightly what the fine-tuning argument is. Is it because the contemporary literature on the fine-tuning argument is presented in such a way that it is way more interesting than the contemporary kind of cutting-edge stuff in the cosmological argument, per se? Or is there any particular reason for why you're going into the fine-tuning argument?
Well, the truth is that I picked it kind of on a whim. I had to pick something for my master's dissertation. The program was such that you have a year, your second year. You just have the whole thing you're doing is writing a thesis, and it was a 30,000 word thesis. And my supervisor said, "What do you want to do?" And I just instinctually said, the fine-tuning argument. But I think there was more to that subconsciously. I mean, and then the reason I picked it up now and have focused in on it for several years, and now as one of the topics of my DPhil, is because it lies at the intersection of science and philosophy. And so it's, by its very nature, it's an interdisciplinary project. So I resist the academic inclination to over-specialization. I really don't want to become an expert on a teeny tiny area to the detriment of all the rest of human inquiry, of which I know nothing in this scenario. I want to have a foothold and a grasp of as wide a range of topics I can, while still being an expert in some specific area. And so how do you do that? Well, one way to do that is to pick a narrow specialization that requires training in a broad range of topics, which naturally represents the overlap of a broad range of disciplines. And the fine-tuning argument is that. It is that. Just think about it. It's philosophical reflection upon certain scientific discoveries. And so immediately you're drawn into fascinating debates about how science and religion relate, how science and philosophy relate, whether or not inferences to a multiverse are scientific, whether they're philosophical, whether they're sound, the possible scientific credentials of an inference to God, whether or not that could even possibly be scientific or whether it needs to, and on and on. The proper analysis of probability of Bayesian approach to probability, subjective versus objective theories of probability in science and philosophy. And the proper way to make these kind of inferences systematic and rigorous. Should we utilize Bayes' theorem, or is that somehow missing something? Is that an artificial construct for something like philosophy? I mean, on and on it goes. And so you quickly realize that to properly, to my level of satisfaction anyway, assess the fine-tuning argument, that's going to take a lifetime. I mean, and you get to learn so many things about so many disciplines. So that's why, because it lets me be an expert on X, on the fine-tuning argument, but know a decent amount about a wide range of things. So I kind of feel like it's the way of having it all, whereas you can't say that for every dissertation topic or every area of expertise.
Mm. And would you say you're quite keen on arguments for the existence of God, like the fine-tuning? Was that kind of something you wanted to do from the very beginning? I suppose you're talking about going into your master's interested in the existence of God and answering these questions. Now that you've kind of come to this position of agnosticism, do you think you might end up jumping out of this field if you did come to the belief that, well, at the end of the day, this is not going to go anywhere. There's good arguments for and against. Can you see yourself moving outside of this field one day in the future?
Oh, I think so. I mean, I think that I don't want that. I said it would take a lifetime to do, but I don't want this to be the only thing I work on. I think even now I'm working on multiple things concurrently. That will probably be the model I pursue for my life. I'll probably never let the fine-tuning argument go completely. I'll probably just continue to pursue it the way I do now, which is in conjunction with other projects that might be related or not within philosophy and adjacent disciplines. And I think that's just the only thing that works for me. I mean, even in one day of study, I have to have 2 or 3 papers going at various levels of completion, because I can't spend the whole day doing one tiny thing. It just, I can't focus on it. And so the way my brain works, I have to pivot. I have to go from one thing to the other. And then if that day, say topic X just isn't doing it for me, I can't find the will to keep reading, I shift to something else, and then I still have a productive day. And then I pursue that globally by having these projects going at the same time. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we'll see if I can continue that model when I hopefully actually become a professor. But for now, that works for me. And I think that it will continue to work for me. I think that there are lots of other arguments that are interesting too that I'd want to work on someday. I mean, I have to do a 5,000 word paper as a special topic for the requirements of the DPhil, and I'm doing it on moral realism, meta-ethics. And that's not related to this, but something I find very interesting that I will hopefully publish on as well. So I think it's a both and situation, at least for the time being.
And can you tell us a bit more about what these projects are? I feel like I'm very similar to you in the sense I always have different projects going on. I have something on AI and philosophy, something on Dostoevsky, something on whatever. I have a few projects in the very similar way as you do. Can you tell us a bit more about these broader interests that you have?
Yeah. So to give you a snapshot of the papers I'm working on, that'll be one lens through which you can see what I do. I have a paper I'm co-authoring with my supervisor, and it's looking at whether or not general relativity has skeptical implications for our knowledge of the universe as a whole. So there are these theorems in the philosophy of physics which ostensibly show that no amount of observations of our local patch of the universe, of our observable universe, could ever justify an inference to the properties of space-time as a whole. Okay, so maybe vaguely understand what I mean there. And so if the theorem holds, well, then apparently there are these very far-reaching skeptical implications about our knowledge of the universe as a whole. And maybe we can't then know if the universe had a beginning, for example, because theorems which attempt to show that there is a beginning of the universe, well, they require that we know the universe in writ large meets this condition, say, or has this property. Well, if we can't know that, well, then we don't know if the universe actually satisfies the condition of that theorem. So it has apparently far-reaching implications, and my supervisor and I are working on this question. Like, does this theorem really have this implication? How seriously should we take it? Is it any different from the more general problem of induction? So on and so forth. So that's kind of adjacent. It's in the philosophy of physics. Another paper I'm preparing to submit is looking at models of a theistic multiverse. They're proposed in pretty recondite philosophical contexts, but they basically aim to show that our world, our reality, is the best possible world. Despite what you may think from looking around you at the imperfections, the world as a whole is the best possible world, and God created it. And so this is supposed to resolve various technical objections to theistic belief. And I take these models and I try to develop them to the highest degree of sophistication that I can, and I defend them from 4 objections in the literature. And I'm preparing to submit this to a top 5 philosophy journal because I think it can make it in, and we'll see how it goes. But that's not fine tuning. That's something else. And it allowed me to look into like philosophy of mathematics, set theory, the aesthetic value of uniqueness, and much else besides. And so those are 2 instances of things that I'm working on in addition to fine tuning. And I've got other papers under review which are fine tuning or fine tuning adjacent, and so that gives you a kind of a look into the things that I am currently working on.
And what draws you to each of these individual ideas? How do you discover new ideas to work on? Is it very much a shower of thoughts? I mean, oftentimes I'm just taking a shower, taking a hot bath, and I'm like, I think I should think about this a bit more. Or, they haven't talked about this enough in the literature. Or is it very much you're reading something and you come across like a side footnote and you're like, that's a very good idea to work on? What's your genesis of ideas and fields of interest?
Yeah, well, I can answer that by looking at the papers I've written and then telling you how I got to them. I think that'd be helpful. So like the first paper I published was on methodological naturalism. This claim that scientific investigation by its very nature cannot appeal to God or other supernatural realities, even if they exist. And I've read about that in various contexts, usually through like creation versus evolution debates from my younger years. But I wanted to look at this as rigorously as possible and say, is this a principle of scientific investigation? And if it is, well, why? I just found it inherently compelling and I couldn't make up my mind about it. And so eventually this paper came about as my attempt to figure that out as rigorously as possible. And then the next one was divine psychology and cosmic fine-tuning, which takes a look at this objection to the fine-tuning argument, the divine psychology objection, that I didn't think had been answered sufficiently well in the existing literature. So there it was more like, there was both. There's this issue that's really, really interesting to me. It's bugging me. I want to make up my mind about it. And I don't think that the existing literature is sufficient to do that. So there's this gap. And then the paper came about from there. Science and the theistic multiverse, or rather it's called Does Science Undermine the Theistic Multiverse? That was a gap that I immediately recognized upon looking into the theistic multiverse. I thought, well, how do these like esoteric philosophical models of God and the multiverse, how do they relate to scientific theories of the multiverse? And nobody had touched that question. And so that was very fertile ground to just kind of say whatever I wanted, because it started it starts the conversation. So you don't have to be right. You just got to say something. And I thought that was very fun. It was, again, this issue of, I just want to make up my mind about this. I can't figure it out. I think for me, that's been the most fertile approach to paper writing and just research projects, is beginning with this real deep desire to figure it out. It's really bugging me and I want to understand it. I want to make up my mind about it. And so if you can find that little nucleus of intellectual frustration and then follow it as far as you possibly can, well, then you're going to get a good paper or a good research project. So that's been my guiding principle.
And how have you found engaging in publications as a master's student and now as a DPhil student being helpful both for your intellectual development, your academic kind of professional development, and also your engagement with other academics? How has getting into publications been helpful? Because I realize a lot of people in philosophy and theology might not have really focused too much on the publication aspect when they're going through the undergraduate and master's and careers.
I think that if you are interested in an academic career and you're even if you're an undergrad, but if you're especially if you're a master's student or a PhD student, publishing isn't good just for your CV for when you then apply to become a professor. It is good, definitely. But that right now, obviously, that's not the key benefit I've felt from it. Rather, a huge benefit has just been that it's made me a much better thinker and philosopher. Because to get something published in a good journal, anyway, I mean, I'm sure there's disreputable journals that'll publish anything. But to get something published in a top 20, top 30 journal, it's got to be pretty rigorous. And if you've never published before, chances are you've never written something as rigorous and deep as what it takes to get published. So I think it's a good goal. Write something that represents the best of your ability, submit it to a journal, and see what happens. If it makes it past the editor, which it probably will, then you're pretty much guaranteed to get reviewer comments back, even if it's rejected. And then those reviewer comments can pinpoint where you need to work. They will tell you how to develop, if they're a good reviewer. If they're a bad reviewer, they'll just say, this paper sucks, goodbye. And those people suck. But if you get good reviewers, they'll tell you why they rejected it. And I know it's painful and it's hard to look at that. But the best thing you can do for yourself to make it the most productive, take a good hard look at those comments and see where you can improve. And do your best to evaluate them objectively. Don't react emotionally. Just say, maybe this critique is good. And it will tell you how to get better. And that's the only way you can do it. And so the process of publishing for me, because it's not like I've published 6 papers so far, and it's not like I've only attempted to publish 6 papers. There's about 4 that have been rejected various times and are now at different journals. And so that's the game. The publication game belongs to those who persevere. And it's been so productive because the paper is always better. Having been rejected, I then improve it. I then become better at writing papers and thinking through things. I become more rigorous because the reviewers, by the nature of the case, hold you to a higher standard than what you held yourself. And that's why they rejected it. They say it didn't meet the standard. So then you learn how to reach it. You learn how to get good enough to get there. So let me take a step back then. If you do all of that and you get published, yes, it's good. You've got something on your CV, but think of what you've gained. You've pushed yourself more than you've been pushed more than you otherwise would, I think, if you didn't attempt to publish at all. You wouldn't sit back and write something to the degree of sophistication that a publication is unless you were trying to publish it most of the time. And so I think that and so then if you do that, if you do all those things, well then, sitting at the other side of 6 publications, 3 or 4 under review, you're just a very good philosopher now. And that benefits your master's work. That benefits your DPhil work. Obviously, it just makes you so much better at those things. So I think if you're doing a master's, if you're doing a DPhil, you should look at it again as both and. I'm doing my master's thesis. I'm, going to tutorials. I'm writing these papers, and I'm trying to publish. And there's a natural overlap. It doesn't have to be where what you publish is independent of what you're studying. No, try to get the most bang for your buck. My master's thesis is now 4 papers. So you see what I mean? Do what you're doing in your master's program, but take it as seriously as possible. Not just, I want to get a good mark on this exam. I want to get my degree, but I want to publish this stuff, because then you'll have great philosophical work. You'll become all the better for it, and you'll be a good philosopher at the end of it. So I think that answered your question.
And do you think universities should put more emphasis on that publication side of things? Because I remember when I was doing my undergraduate at the University of Oxford, I didn't really get any suggestions to publish. A lot of the things I was writing was purely just out of personal interest and kind of wanting to do it myself just because I'm interested in a topic. Whereas I was talking to a good friend who was doing undergrad in China, and they were saying, well, actually in China, the philosophy departments do promote students to actually publishing from an undergraduate level all the way into their masters and beyond, but it starts very early to have that desire to publish and get their works out. Now, I was also talking to that student, and I'm not exactly sure how peer review and whatnot works over in China and the journals over there. So that's another kind of question to see. Is the experience completely identical? Maybe not. Right. But nonetheless, they do have that pressure or even that just suggestion to publish as an undergraduate and going forward, whereas in Oxford, it doesn't really have that. Do you think universities should be focusing more on that publication ethic?
I think they certainly need to focus more on that for master's students. There was even a time, I was talking to one professor here at Oxford, there was even a time where they dissuaded DPhil, PhD students from publishing. I don't know why. But now, if your aim is to become a professor, you need to have you need to have a sizable number of publications on your CV. That's an essential third of the 3 ingredients that go into a successful application to a hiring committee. So for PhDs, that's nonsense to advise them not to publish. Master's students, I think it's still exceptional for a master's student to get published. The majority do not. Probably the vast majority don't, but it's still possible, and to your benefit for all the reasons I indicated. And then if you're in a master's program and you get published and you apply to a PhD program, that's going to look great on the application to the PhD program, because it's still pretty rare for a master's student to have 1, 2, or 3 publications. So I think that we would do well to advise students to publish as early as possible, both for their own edification and for the practical payoff come application time. I think if you're going to do that as a master's student, and then I'll get to the undergrad question, you need to enlist the help of seasoned professors of philosophy. I did not get here on my own. I still do this, but especially at the beginning with my first couple papers, I would cold email professors whose expertise was in the area of that paper or adjacent areas. And I would say, hey, can you read this paper? You know, I'm a master's student at Oxford. I've written this paper. Maybe it interacts with your work. Maybe it doesn't, or you know the topic kind of well. Will you take a look at this and offer feedback? Professors of philosophy, you know, if you're in that kind of discipline, most of the time you do it because you want to help the up and coming generation, to train the next generation of scholars. And so they want to help you. And I found that 60% of those cold emails received a yes. And they read through it and offered feedback. And that's pivotal. That's pivotal. Unless you're a super genius, and maybe you are, you're not going to know how to do this. And so at the beginning, you're going to need someone to help you. You're going to need mentors at the beginning. And I instinctually knew that, and that's what I did. I just emailed people until I got 4 or 5 professors to look at the paper. And then based on those conversations, it was still my paper, but it was much more sophisticated. They showed me where to push. They showed me the gaps, the holes. They pointed me to other literature to fill in the gaps in my argument, to make it more sophisticated. And from then I learned how to do it. I learned how to write something publishable. All the more so if you are an undergraduate who wants to publish. I don't think I ever could have published something on my own as an undergraduate. I just wasn't good enough. You're a kid. You're still learning how to do philosophy. Again, there are super genius exceptions. I've met some of them here. But for the majority of us, including myself, maybe I could have gotten something published as an undergrad if a professor or two took a real investment in my work and helped me, maybe co-authored the paper with me. So I guess I would say, if you're an undergrad, you're doing philosophy and you want to publish, good. The ambition is good, but get help, get assistance from professors or other PhD students or other postdocs who are willing to take you seriously. And if they're not willing to take you seriously, then fuck them, let them go and keep talking until you find someone who wants to help you. I think there's nothing wrong with ambition. I wish I had that as an undergrad and decided to do that, but it's just going to be harder because you're just so new to this. You're still learning how to do philosophy in the first place, how to think about these things. You're still learning the content. So it's just harder by the nature of the case. But that's by no means does that mean you can't do it. It just means for the vast majority of us, you're going to need a mentor to help you along. So find them.
That's really good advice. And I suppose a lot of people watching this might actually be quite interested in learning a bit more about studying philosophy and theology, or just philosophy at the University of Oxford. I suppose oftentimes we sit here, at least I felt I was sitting here during my undergraduate, and I took it all for granted, not because I didn't like it being here, but I was like, I just didn't realize that I was actually studying at the University of Oxford, and that was something that probably is on the bucket list of quite a lot of people. So
it's a pretty cool thing.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, where do you get to walk down? I was walking down opposite St. John's the other day, down Woodstock Road, and I just looked up blue skies over St. John's. It was the most beautiful scene ever. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm actually here. It's wonderful. So I was wondering, for people who are interested in studying philosophical theology or just philosophy in general, what would you tell them, or what advice do you think you would give them if they're looking to apply for, I suppose, apply now for the MPhil as well as the DPhil? What advice would you give them for the MPhil first and then maybe the DPhil next?
My first piece of advice, if you are applying, especially for a PhD program, to repeat a point earlier, is to try to get published, because it still is quite rare for a master's student to have 2 solid publications. And if you can do that, that will immediately set you apart from other people applying. So for all the reasons I said, that's key. It'll show that you are a very good philosopher. And the second is to maintain a broad interest in philosophical topics. Keep your areas of interest wide, especially if you're applying to U.S. programs. I think one of the things that I may have done wrong in my applications to U.S. graduate programs was in my statement of purpose, I was ultra narrow in defining what my interests were, because I thought, well, they want to see like a very, very concrete application and a very, very concrete suggestion for like, this is what I want to do. And that's good. But I think, at Princeton, for example, I was told after the fact that they're looking for applications that show a philosopher who's got a wide range of interests, really intrigued by many different things in philosophy and is adaptable and flexible and blah, 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 blah. So I would cultivate a grounding in philosophy as a whole and don't get too pigeonholed on your favorite little thing. That's good. That's what you do for your dissertation. But you want to show that, I am trained in philosophy broadly. I'm not just this one thing. And applying to Oxford, it's a little different because you do have a research proposal for the PhD, especially. And so then you do want to be quite specific. But I would say for programs as ranging widely from the UK and the US, you want to show that you're not just a philosopher of X, but you're a good philosopher. Now, applying to Oxford specifically, I don't know that I don't think there's any special things that wouldn't implicate just an application to philosophy programs anywhere. You want to have your written sample. Okay, this is applicable anywhere. So you want to have a written sample that is your very best work. I have tried to help people through the application process who have confessed to me that they wrote their sample a week before the application deadline. Do not do that. You are not good enough to do that. Again, there's the Einstein exceptions. But if you're me, if you're anybody else, it's not going to work out good for you. And so I would write this. I would begin the applications at least 2 months out. Begin the statement of purpose, the research statements, the written sample at least 2 months out, so you have ample time to really reflect upon it and think it all through. And then get letters of rec from people who know you and know your work well. You have the option sometimes of doing a non-academic reference for one of them. Usually you are given 3 letters of recommendation that you have to supply. Find 3 professors, preferably within philosophy if you're applying to a philosophy program. It's just going to work out better for you. And so if you do those things and you get good marks, then that's the best you can do. The thing is, it's extremely competitive for philosophy graduate programs in the US or the UK. That's just the nature of the beast right now. And so even if you are exceptional, you might not get into your favorite program. And so that would be my last piece of advice is apply to 10 or 15 places. Not to put a specific number on it, but apply broadly. And apply to those places where you would be happy to go to, but don't just apply to the top 5. That might work out, but it is not worth the risk. You may end up in a situation such as myself, the first time I applied to graduate programs or to PhD programs, where I only got into Oxford without funding and I got in nowhere else. And it was a very bad situation. So then the second time around, I applied to 11 places. And obviously I had that extra year to work on publishing and crafting a better application. And it worked out a lot better. And here I am with funding at Oxford. So apply widely, work very hard on the application, and establish yourself as someone who's interested in a range of topics in philosophy. And I think that's and I'd say finally, when applying to specific programs, make sure there's an alignment between your interests and the department. So this is where having a wide range of interests is helpful, because it's more likely then that one of the things you're interested in and have shown rigorous training in will match with an interest of a professor or two on that particular philosophy department. I think one of the things that hampered me was I said, okay, I'm interested in the fine-tuning argument. Here it is. But then if you apply to programs where the philosophy they do, say, isn't even philosophy of religion, much less the fine-tuning argument, you might be as stellar a philosophy student as they come, but there's just not going to be faculty there that can help you, that are going to want to work with you, because they just don't have overlapping interests. So you want to make yourself broad, but then at the same time, find departments, do the legwork research of finding departments that have faculty there who care about the stuff you care about. And if you get that alignment, and if you get published, and if you got a good writing sample, well, then you've got as good an application as you can ask for.
That sounds very good. And also, from the perspective of just life in Oxford, you've been in Oxford for 3 years already, or this is your third year at Oxford? I was wondering, third year at Oxford. What do you think about being at Oxford makes it so unique? And if you had to describe what makes the Oxford education stand out, what would you say?
So 2 things off the top of my head. The first is the tutorial system. That's especially pertinent to master's degrees. For those programs, you have a set of topics that you will look at, but it's not your typical like lecture style learning where you go to class, they have the PowerPoint, they talk, you take notes. Most of the time, it is a tutorial system where it's anywhere from 1 to 3 students and the professor for a 1 to 2 hour session each week. You write an essay based upon a reading list prior to the tutorial. You send it to the tutor, hopefully more than 24 hours prior so that they can read it. And then you go into the tutorial and the professor, based upon your specific essay, talks to you about the argument you make. I mean, talk about like a world-class education, sitting before this expert in their discipline, and they're talking to you about your paper. It's very specialized. It's very specific to you. I mean, that's just unparalleled, that kind of attention. And I think that's what helped me then go on to publish is there were these world-renowned experts who were critiquing my work. They were already doing it. They were just doing it in the context of a tutorial paper. So that kind of education, you just can't beat. You just can't beat. And I think it's to Oxford's credit that that's their style. The primary vehicle of education is the tutorial model. So that's the first point. The second point about what makes Oxford unique is one that's more difficult to characterize and might make people roll their eyes if they're not here and acquainted with what I mean. But that is, do not underestimate the value of being in a place that inspires you to do well. The primary value of Oxford for me has been just being here to do my work. I mean, when you're in the Taylorian Library or the Bodleian Library or the Radcliffe Camera or any other number or the various grand college libraries, or even just in a cafe looking over Christ Church College, Christ Church Meadows, you are inspired to excellence in a way that you would not be in a Severance-style office building. I mean, there's beauty in this place, and it's majestic, and it feels scholarly, and all of these things put together. Like, if you feel good, you do good. That's the core insight. I mean, if you're in somewhere that makes you feel like you are a scholar, well, you're a lot more likely to be a scholar. I think to just put it into the bite-sized chunk. And so that's why I've loved being here so much, is it's just amazing. It's just beautiful. Even on a rainy day like today, you still have Christ Church towering over you. You still have Magdalen College, which is a castle to your left. You still have these structures that imbue a sense of importance into the work that you're doing. And maybe you're going to sneer at that, but I would not undersell that point. It's magical here. I can't put it any other way. It's just magical. And I didn't want to give that up. So when I looked at these various offers that I had of PhD programs, there were some factors on the table that weighed in favor of a US PhD. Ultimately, when I factored everything out, weighed it all out, had my cost benefits analysis, the main factor that moved me to Oxford is I am happy and inspired in Oxford. And so that's where I'm going to go. And that's just, not only does that impact your scholarship, the kind of work that you do, you only get one life. And 4 years is a long time. And so go where you'll be happy. And I think Oxford has something to say in terms of just a place that a place that inspires and that is beautiful and that lends itself to contemplation in a way that not everywhere can claim. And so for that reason, I think the magic of Oxford is something more ineffable than just the style of its education and something you can reflect on paper. It's the vibe. It's the place. It's how you feel when you're here. And if you disagree with me, well, take a trip over here and see for yourself. I think it will bear out what I'm saying. Do you kind of agree? I mean, you're here.
Oh, I agree 100%.
I'm sure you get it.
Oh yeah, no, I get it. I have to say, even when I was at Regent's Park, I don't want to say anything negative about Regent's Park. I mean, even though it looks kind of like a colonial building in Hong Kong, it was very good already as it is. But now that I'm in Oriel, it is brilliant. But as you say, the libraries, just walking through the streets, it's just so inspiring. The history of who's come before you. I mean, just going to Oriel and you just see John Henry Newman, St. Thomas More, and then Keble just on the portraits in the dining room. All of that just like, well, I feel it almost humbles you in a sense that you don't feel you need to be like, oh, I must be the next big figure because, well, okay, I'm just simply just never going to be the next big figure compared to old Newman. But it also inspires you to say, well, actually, those people did come through here and maybe I could. Well, maybe I wouldn't as well. But it just gives you that environment in which thought can be developed in some sense.
I mean, I think it's a huge privilege to be here. And thankfully, knock on wood, I still feel that way. I haven't quite gotten jaded or felt entitled. It is a privilege to be walking through this city, through these colleges, being engaged in these conversations in these historic pubs, and to be able to lay claim to going to Oxford. It's a privilege beyond measure. And yes, you work very hard to earn your place here. But even granting all that is still... everything you do is not enough to say, oh, I deserve this. No, it's just a privilege. It's just a privilege. And your work and your life as a whole will benefit, I think, from being in a place like this.
And I suppose we've talked a lot about how influential figures, or at least philosophers, have helped us in our journey. And I've been very lucky to get to know a lot of them, both through Oxford and also through YouTube, making YouTube videos for the last 4 years. So I was wondering, in your experience, how have you found reaching out to academics? How has that process helped? First of all, maybe talk about that in Oxford, and then also talk about that in a broader sense.
How has reaching out to academics helped my philosophical work? Yeah,
philosophical work, but also, building those connections with professors. How can someone do that, and how have you found that beneficial?
Yes. So within the halls of Oxford, there have been a few instances where I've been working on a paper and I emailed a professor here in Oxford, say, like Timothy Mawson. It stands out very distinctly. I said, I'm working on this paper on the fine-tuning argument. Can you take a look? And he said, sure, send it along. So I sent it to him. He emailed back a few days later, said, I read it. It's a good paper. Would you like to meet up? Let's meet and discuss this in my office if you're free. And so then we essentially just had a tutorial. I went in, he had the paper printed with comments in the margins, and we talked through it for an hour and a half. And it was incredible. He had no obligation to do this, right? I was not his student, but he took me seriously, and I benefited enormously from that. And so right then and there is a connection built. And so then through attending things like the Joseph Butler Society and other meetings facilitated by the philosophy faculty, you brush shoulders with these intellectual giants. And if you're humble and not otherwise off-putting, you can make a good connection with these people and get to know them just as real people. So another huge one that I met through the Joseph Butler Society was Richard Swinburne. And I think in just philosophy, he's a big name, but in philosophy of religion, he's as famous as you can get. And it's been so fulfilling to sit down and speak with him at various occasions, get to know him. When you add a face to a name, you spend all this time, if you're anything like me, you read these people growing up and contemplated their ideas. And so in that respect, you know them. But then to get to know the person is amazing. And so that's the obvious thing, is just being here in Oxford. There's lots of people that filter through. I was able to go to the pub with Philip Goff because he came into Oxford to give a lecture. Like lots of people come here who aren't from here. And so you get to interact with people from all over the world. And that's an opportunity I wouldn't have had if I went to somewhere in the States. And then, of course, I would say, even compared to that, the main source of networking that I found has been the YouTube channel. Because if you think about it, I've had 60 episodes so far. That's about like 52 or 53 different guests, philosophers and other experts and some YouTubers. That's been the huge cash money of the YouTube thing. Not the £50 a week or £50 a month that I make from ad revenue. No, the main benefit has been the connections that I've made from people throughout the world who will reply to my emails and agree to sit down with me for a conversation. And that the payoff there, like, I don't even think I need to list off the benefits of that. You sit down and you talk for an hour or two with a world-leading expert on some fascinating question. I mean, what a privilege. What a privilege to be able to do that, to just ask them your questions. You know, if you're reading a book that someone's written, you don't get to have your questions that you scribble in the margins. You don't get to have them answered by the author. But you can if you do this YouTube thing. So I have often said that even if my channel stopped growing right here, you know, no more fame, no more views, this is just it would have been more than worthwhile because of the life benefit of just expanding your horizons and the privilege of talking to people about things that they know so well, and that it allows you to see further than you ever could see by yourself, and it keeps you humble, keeps you well-rounded, all of the things. So and then of course too, like you network more broadly, and that helps your career if you're in academia, because you don't know where you're going to apply, say, to a hiring committee for a professorship. You don't know what university that's going to be. You don't know what faculty are going to be in that university. And it may be that when your application pops up, someone says, "Oh, Miles, yeah, I know him. We recorded a discussion together. He's a good chap," and that's going to help you. Unless you're terrible at it and you're just awful and it sours someone's view of you. But barring that, it's a really productive thing. And, you know, maybe that will pay off in terms of career prospects, maybe not. But the main benefit is just what it does for your ability to do philosophy well. It's a lot better the more people you can talk to.
I agree with you 100%. I think the YouTube thing has really been a good way to meet people. I mean, there's a few papers I have in process, and a lot of them have been read by people who, you know, I've interviewed, and that's been a very helpful source of just getting to know people and
same.
And talking to them. I mean, that's been one of the best things. And I think we might soon see more and more academics, or at least masters and DPhil students, making YouTube channels. I'm quite aware Louis might be making YouTube channels soon as well. So, I think, you know, we might get a lot of this renaissance of the academic YouTube videos coming out, which hopefully would be good for the broader intellectual community. And we've talked a bit about YouTube. Perhaps to end off or slowly wrap up this video, let's talk a bit more about your experience on YouTube. What has been kind of the motivating factors for starting the YouTube? Was it to get those networks? Was it to explore ideas more? What was that thought process when you're coming to make this channel?
Well, I had watched Alex O'Connor for years and listened to his Within Reason podcast. And I one day went, I could do that. And I think I could do that really well. Now, I have since learned it's a lot harder to do that than you might think. But I think I'm learning. I'm getting better all the time. And so who knows where I'll end up in terms of my abilities. But I just thought, you know, I think that I could do this well. And so I'd want to see what kind of impact I could make. And so I started doing it. But then immediately after the first 3, I went, this is one of the most fulfilling things I've ever done. And so then the motivation shifted, not just, oh, I think I'm good at this, and so let me see if I can conquer this new thing, this new skill set. It was having these kinds of conversations is so utterly fulfilling. I simply have to do this. I have to, this is a hobby, right? This is my career, but it needs to be a very serious hobby. This needs to be something I take very seriously and invest time and energy into, because it's just one of the most damn fulfilling things I've done. And I think you've got to honor that. When you find something that is that fulfilling to you, you've got to follow it to see where it leads. And I just think that if I keep doing this, if I keep giving it my all, something amazing will come out of it. And maybe I'm wrong, but I've got nothing to lose by following that thread. It's so another way of putting it is I just quickly discovered this was a passion. And what is it? What is it that is so fulfilling, the passion of it? Well, most of us, I think most intellectual types, or academics, I should say, not most of us smart people. No, most of us like academically inclined folk have niche interests relative to the general population. You know, there's only so many people that you can talk to about God's relationship to time, for example. And it can be quite lonely. You know, there's a limited pool of people you can talk to about this thing you're super passionate about. And so what I found is that if I open up myself to a digital medium, well, suddenly the whole world opens up in terms of who you can connect with and who you can talk to about your shared interests. And so suddenly I was able to sit down with Alex Malpass and have an hour and a half conversation about the Kalam cosmological argument, going into all of the nuance that I've always wanted to with someone who can follow along and eclipse me and have this intellectually stimulating exploration of ideas that matter to me. And that's been every single conversation so far. And you find that sometimes, if you're at the pub, especially at Oxford, among your philosophical cohort, yes, you're going to have that. But by and large, brushing shoulders in real life, right, the non-digital mediums and platforms, you just don't have that opportunity. And so I found that through the internet, my whole world suddenly got so much bigger. And so weekly, I could have these conversations that I could not have any other time. And I think they are very high quality. I mean, I believe in the product I'm putting out. I believe in what I'm doing. And so it is the benefit to me and in my personal life, yes. And it is also equal parts a belief that the product I'm putting out is of a benefit to other people too. And so between those two pillars, that's all the motivation I need. And that's what drives me.
Mm. That is very good. And is there any kind of development or, I suppose, ideas, or I suppose, what's the best way to phrase this? Are there any inspiration that you've gotten from making these YouTube videos, apart from, I guess, academic development? You've tested out this idea, you've developed in a certain way. Has there been broader benefits from making a YouTube channel?
It's certainly, so for just making a YouTube channel itself, it's certainly one more opportunity to grow as a person, because whenever you embark on something totally new, like it's like a YouTube channel, it has unique challenges which you didn't foresee, and it forces you to grow in ways that you hadn't before. Because no one prior to doing the YouTube channel knows how to do it. So you learn as you go, and you get better and you grow, and you're forced to think through things in a different way. It's one thing writing papers; it's another thing doing a YouTube channel. These are largely non-overlapping skill sets, and so it's just good. It's good to have multiple fronts that you're working on, and multiple skill sets. So that's one benefit. I think that in terms of my life, again, it reflects the broader trajectory of my life and thoughts that I get from continuing to do philosophy rigorously and academically. If you do it well, if you do this kind of a YouTube channel well, then you talk to people on both sides of the ideological spectrum, both sides of the debate, whatever that debate is. And I think it can teach you due intellectual humility, both because you realize that there are smart people on both sides, but also because if you're picking the right people, if you're not just picking people that you think you can intellectually dominate, but you're picking people that you think are your equals or better, then they will challenge you. And you will learn that you are not the final word on these topics. And it makes you humble, because you just realize that you know less than you think you do. You're not as good as you think you are. If you're coming at it from, say, a heightened ego, it brings you down to baseline. And then, if you need to actually improve your image of your own abilities, then you realize, oh, I actually can sit with these experts and have an intelligent, articulate conversation. And so I think I've benefited from both in different ways, both directions of benefit. And it brings you to a place of humility. If you talk to the world leading experts, it has to. There's nobody, even the Einsteins, that wouldn't benefit from that kind of engagement. So it keeps me grounded, in short.
And where do you think the Miles K. Donahue channel is going to go in the future? Do you think it's going to be more of the same, more interviews, discussions, or is there a secret plan that you have up your sleeve, or your short sleeves, that you have hidden?
Yeah, so I've got a few debates scheduled, which I know isn't exactly unique for this kind of channel niche, but is very exciting for me, because now I'll get to pit two experts against each other and see how I do as a moderator. And I don't know. I think again, like the interviews, I've got my own unique style, and I believe in the product, the brand, and I think I can supply something unique too to the debating scene, the moderation scene. I mean, we'll see. I've got my first one later today, and we'll see how that goes. But that's one new venture for the channel. I also would love to do more like video essays. I really would, but they just take so much more time, at least to develop them to the level of quality that I want. It's just too much time that it takes away. But I would like to do that more content where I'm just kind of exploring ideas myself and presenting things. I think that'll help me develop in my teaching abilities, which is another facet of a professorship, is to be able to like lecture and explain. I think if I can do video essays, that will help develop those things. And it's just one more format for engaging with ideas. So in terms of like the long-term trajectory of the channel, I don't know where it's going to go. So that's the content I think that I will maintain. And yeah, the heart of it will always be, I think, these conversations. But like, how big will it get? And, what kind of a platform will it become? How big a platform? I don't know. I think that I can expect modest growth for it. I think I can expect substantial growth. But past a certain point, past 100,000 subscribers, 1 million subscribers, there's only so many Alex O'Connors that can exist, just by the nature of the case and have that size of a platform. I have no idea whether I'll make it to that point. But I am ambitious enough to think I might. I have enough belief in myself to think I might. So all I can do is offer my highest quality work, consistently engage in critical self-reflection to improve, and then go forward. And if it's not enough, well, that's okay. It was never going to be enough. But I think that's the only thing we can do is offer the best that we have, and whatever happens, happens. So that's my meta philosophy.
Wonderful. That sounds very brilliant. I'm looking forward to see how this channel goes. And I suppose knowing you in person will allow me to kind of track it with more precise detail. Be like, Myles, how is it doing? Have you reached your subscriber goals this month? And
right.
That would be quite an interesting sight to see. Well, thank you very much for coming onto this channel. We've talked about a lot of things, from YouTube to the Oxford experience to philosophy of religion, and about YouTube in general. So hope you've all enjoyed this video. Like always, let me know what you want to see on the channel in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts there. And of course, check out Myles's YouTube channel, and as well as his published articles. I'm sure you can go check it out on PhilPapers and that as well. Thank you very much for watching. Stay safe. See you soon. God bless, and goodbye.